Okay, hi everyone. We can go ahead and get started. People might be trickling in, but I'll go ahead and give a brief presentation, and then I'm going to leave plenty of time at the end to open it up to you guys for questions. But if you have questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand or type the question in the chat, or just be brainstorming those questions, and I'll turn it over to you guys at the end. But thank you all so much for coming today. Today's session is called Crack the Case, and we're going to be covering case and behavioral interview prep. I really just want to give you a way that's structured. You'll feel calm and it's repeatable so that you are feeling confident going into your interviews. Everything that I'm sharing today is what worked for me through trial and error, and I just want to um, give you my tips and tricks. So, first, just a little bit about me, so you guys have a little bit of background of who I am and what my experience is. My name is Holly Anderson. I'm a senior here at USC. I'm majoring in industrial and systems engineering, and I also have a minor in business finance. Some of the things I'm involved in at USC is IISE, or the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers. For this, I was the director of consulting last fall, and I got to put on a consulting career fair with a couple different consulting firms, which was super fun. I got to connect with those recruiters, which was really awesome. I'm also part of SWE, or the Society of Women Engineers. Another big thing that took up a lot of my time freshman and sophomore year is a program called Mission Science through the Viterbi Impact Program. Basically, this is a program where once a week I would travel to an underprivileged elementary school in the LA area and get to teach a STEM lesson to a group of fourth and fifth graders each week. And this was super awesome. I'm someone who loves kids and loves math and science, so it was super awesome to be able to give back to the community in that way. I'm also in Pi Phi, and I served on our philanthropy committee in my sophomore year and got to put on a couple of different events to raise money for our philanthropy, which was really rewarding. Then, in terms of job experience, after my freshman year, I interned at a project management construction company called Aldridge Electric. Two of my uncles actually worked here. So that's kind of how I got my foot in the door after freshman year. The following summer, I worked at FH Passion, another construction management company. After that, although I learned a lot and worked on really great teams, I learned that construction management wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So I kind of pivoted and switched gears and I started heavily recruiting for consulting. I ended up interning at KPMG this past summer in their advisory practice doing consulting, specifically customer and operations consulting, which I can speak to a little bit more if anybody's interested about that. Um, and After this summer, I got a full-time offer. So I will be working there full-time after I graduate in May, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me so you guys can kind of keep my background in mind as I'm sharing these tips about the interviews that I was going through and thinking about what I might have been interviewing for and how that might compare to what you guys are interviewing for. Okay, so first I want to break down the two different types of interviews that you're going to see. So there's behavioral interviews and case interviews, and these are two pretty different types of interviews. A behavioral interview is going to be testing who you are and how you act. This is going to be looking for things like your communication skills, your leadership experience, your ownership of past projects, and if you're going to be a cultural fit for that company. On the other hand, a case interview is going to be more so how you think and how you solve problems. This is really going to be more so how you can structure your thinking, your analytical ability, quantitative reasoning, maybe doing math during these, and like your business judgment, because a lot of times these cases are going to be business cases. So those are kind of just a quick intro to the two different types of interviews. And now I'll dive a little bit deeper into each of them. Um, so, oh, sorry, actually, before we go into that, I want to just say, a big thing with interviews is the nerves that come with it. It's super natural to be nervous going into an interview. Obviously, it's a high stake situation and you're going to be nervous going into it, but these are just some tips and tricks to help you stay calm under that pressure. I separated this into things to do before the interview and then also during the interview. So, before the interview, practice, time yourself, and do mock interviews. The only way that you're going to feel more comfortable doing interviews is practicing. Like anything, practice makes perfect. So the more you're doing these, the more comfortable you're going to be, the more confident you're going to be going into those interviews. These don't have you like it says on here, like you don't have to be doing actual interviews with companies. You can do mock interviews. You can just practice answers with your friends, whatever it may be. Then, in terms of during the interview, how to stay calm under this pressure, slow down, take structured pauses, and ask questions. Um, this is going to these are going to show signs of confidence. You don't want to be rushing through. You want to really take your time and structure what you're saying so you come across as like intelligent and put together and really owning your answers and ask questions if you're confused, so that you don't like you're not giving a completely wacky answer that doesn't even fit the question. Okay, now before we jump into more specifics about the two different types of interviews, I do want to give just some basic job interview tips. First, make a good impression. People say, I don't actually think this is true, but people do say that interviewers often make their decision about you within the first 30 seconds or the first 60 seconds. They claim that right off the bat they can tell if you'd be a good fit for their company. I think that's a little bit dramatic in my opinion. But I think it definitely doesn't hurt to make a good first impression, have a good smile on your face, be enthusiastic about being there in the interview. This interviewer is taking time out of their day to interview you. So you definitely want to be grateful to them, be excited, show that you're personable, all those things. Another thing is just have good posture while you're sitting there, test up your setting. I always just blur my background and I think it looks a little bit more professional. Um, yeah, and just make sure that you're in the frame good, they can see you, you have good connection, things like that. The third one on here says be on time. This is talking about in person, give extra travel time. I know interviews are starting to transition back to in person, but a lot still are on Zoom. So, like I said, like make sure you have good connection, make sure you're in a place that's going to be quiet, just things like that. That do definitely like just don't let those things slip your mind. Um, Fourth is bring any materials. Again, this is talking more so in person, but also if you're doing it online, especially for casing interviews, you're going to want something to write with. So make sure that you're prepared and not scrambling around while the interview is starting, like being like, oh, wait, hold on, I need to go grab a piece of paper. And then dress professionally and make sure you are well groomed or just presented for this interview. A lot of times, interviews will give you some sort of guideline, like business casual, whatever. I think always err on the side of being more dressed up versus not dressed up enough. Obviously, it's only on Zoom, it's only going to be top up, so you can be in your sweatpants and a collared shirt or whatever it may be. But just making sure that you look professional and you want to be presenting yourself as your best. Okay, so now that we covered kind of a little bit of the basics, we're going to jump into the two different types of interviews and really dive into some specific tips for these interviews. So, starting with behavioral interviews, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this before, but one of the tips for answering questions in behavioral interviews is something known as the STAR method, and that's breaking it down into situation, task, action, and result. Going a little bit more specifically into that. So, situation is setting up the context of your story. Briefly describe where and when it happened, and make sure to keep it relevant to the question. So, if, let's say, for example, the question is, tell me about a time when you led a team and changed your approach to solving the problem. As you're setting this up, make sure that you mention the problem, make sure you mention the team, make sure you're just saying, oh, during my sophomore year in this class, I had a project about this, or whatever it may be. Then you're going to move into the task. Explain your responsibility or the challenge that you faced. It's really important here. Focus on what you did, not necessarily what the team did as a whole. A lot of times you're going to be using maybe internship experience or class experience or club experience. And obviously, these are group settings, but you really want to be highlighting what you did. That's what the interviewer is really curious. They want to see how you think, how you solve problems, how you act in different situations. So really try to highlight what you did. So, for example, don't say like, oh, my team analyzed all this data. Be like, my team analyzed data, but I specifically was in charge of the scheduling or whatever it may be. I'm just throwing out random examples here. Then the next step is action. So again, describe specifically what you did. Highlight whatever skill you're trying to bring out here. So if it's problem solving, if it's leadership, if it's technical, and try to be detailed, but concise. You don't want to be going on and on and on during these questions. You kind of want to concisely get to the point. I think a rough rule is to talk for like 2 minutes maximum. Again, that's rough. And like, if you need a little bit more time, don't be too harsh on yourself. And then it's really important, the last one, result. This is something that I didn't do when I was first interviewing, and I think is super, super important. It's probably the most important step out of all of them. Make sure that you share the outcome of your actions, and quantify results whenever possible, and then include lessons learned if relevant. So once you tell your whole little story, you really want to tie it back. I would always tie it back to the question. So say like, okay, um, so like you can even literally like say like, so in conclusion, a time when I solved a problem was this. I learned this, and like the results were that whatever, like XYZ improved by ABC or whatever it might be. Like just trying to make it super structured and really tying it back at the end. You can kind of go up and down in the middle, but make sure that you're really tying it back to the question, highlighting that result at the end, to show the outcome, because it doesn't really matter what you did unless it has a positive effect. Um, and this is really important because interviewers really care about ownership and they're really caring about impact. So all of these different steps help you to make sure that you're highlighting that. Okay, moving on. So here are some of the common mistakes that people make with the STAR method. I think the STAR method is a really great base to have when setting up your different stories, when setting up your answers. But these are definitely common mistakes that maybe make the STAR method not super effective. So number one is spending 70% of the time on the situation. Obviously, the interviewer needs to know a little bit of the background. You can't just jump in and be like, okay, when I was working on this team, they're gonna be like, okay, what was that project? How old were you? When did this happen? What's the relevance here? Like, you need to set up a little bit of background, but don't spend all your time on that. They more so are caring about what you did, how you impacted it, what skill you're trying to highlight. So definitely introduce it, but don't spend all the amount of time of it. Another common mistake is saying we instead of I. I think I highlighted this a lot on the last slide, but making sure you're highlighting what you did, the impact you made, what you specifically were doing on the team, all of those things. Another common mistake is not quantifying impact. Sometimes this it's kind of hard. I know this is also a very general tip on resumes to quantify anything when possible instead of saying like, oh, we helped increase sales. Like say we helped increase sales by however much percent over this amount of time. Anytime that you can include a number that shows meaning is going to be very helpful. And then, like I said, the last common mistake is ending without reflection. This was something that I kind of oversaw at first, but I think that's really when your answers become a lot more powerful. And it also kind of helps the interviewer really take away the message that you're trying to give. So that's the structure for how to do behavioral interviews, but how are you actually going to practice them are these 4 steps. So you want to prepare, deliver, reflect, and polish. So in the prepare stage, you want to build out on here it says 6 to 8. I think 5 or 6 is probably appropriate if you can't come up with 8. Strong star stories. So looking at that framework and thinking about 6 different stories in your life that could fit this framework, that could generally fit a lot of different questions. So, a lot of times when you're prepping for an interview and you're going to be looking at practice questions, a lot of them are going to kind of fall under that same umbrella to be like, tell me about a time you failed. Tell me about a time you faced a challenge. Tell me about a time when you had to think differently. Tell me about a time when you worked with a difficult team member. All of those tell me about a times. Um, I think that you can come up with a list of questions. I fortunately did all of my interviews on Zoom. So I literally would have like a sticky note on my computer of like my 5 go-to stories. Like I would just call them like, oh, like my sophomore year gym project, like freshman year internship, like talk about this. Like, and I would literally have them listed out. So then when they asked me, like, tell me about a time, I'd look through my little list. I'm like, okay, which one best fits this? And I had these stories ready to go. Um, One really, really big tip, which is kind of hopping over the next one, is practice out loud. I know it sounds kind of silly, but actually saying your answers out loud before the interview is going to be so, so helpful. Whether this is talking to yourself in the mirror, whether you want to record yourself and listen to the video back, whether I did a lot of practice just with my roommates or with someone on the phone while I'm walking around or something like that. But actually saying those answers out loud will help you come off as a lot more comfortable and a lot more confident. And again, if I didn't say it enough, focus on that I, not we. Um, and then the third step is reflect. Again, quantify the results, share the lessons learned, show growth over time. Again, you want to really highlight what you did, how you growed, what skills you're trying to share with them. You really want to make sure that they're getting it. Like, say it as clearly as possible. Like, in this project, I learned that sometimes you have to take leadership, you have to think in a different way, or whatever the lesson is that you learned. And then step four is to polish. So do mock behavioral rounds. Again, this can even be as simple as someone in your major is also going through the interview process and you guys sit down and ask questions back and forth and give each other feedback. Also prepare follow-up answers. I'll kind of cover this a little bit later in the presentation. But I think that's super helpful to kind of go into the interview with questions prepared so you're not caught off guard when they ask you at the end. And then also in terms of practicing, make sure you kind of refine your tell me about yourself without fail. I think in every interview I did, it starts with the interviewer introducing themselves, asking you how you are, and then asking, okay, tell me a little bit about yourself. Obviously, they're probably have seen your resume or are looking at your resume up on their computer. But you kind of just want to have this as a little elevator pitch, like 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. Again, it shouldn't be a perfect script, but you should definitely have it somewhat rehearsed just to make sure that you're actually saying all the things that you want to say. Like even on my slide when I introduce myself, that's like second nature to me at this point, just because had to introduce myself so many times like that. But it can look very similar to how I did. Something I would always do is be like, I would always end my tell me about yourself, like, and I'm super excited to be here today. Like, I thank you for taking the time. But yeah, so those are the four steps for behavioral interviews. I'm going to pause here for a second if anybody has any questions about behavioral interviews, and then we can jump more into case interviews as well. Okay, if nobody has questions at this time, we can keep going, and then I'll leave more time for questions at the end. Again, feel free to type those questions in the chat if you have anything that comes up. But we can go ahead and keep going. Okay, so now switching gears from behavioral interviews to case interviews. So, what is a case interview trying to test? They're testing three different things in summary. They're trying to see if you can structure a messy problem. They are trying to see if you can interpret data quickly and can you break it into logical parts. This is looking at how you analyze a problem. And then they're looking at can you communicate your thinking clearly. A case interview, if you guys are unfamiliar, is basically the interviewer is going to present you with a business, a fake business, with a problem, and you're in charge of providing them the steps to solve this problem. That's very generally put. But they're really just trying to see how you think, and if you can communicate what you're thinking. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to case interviews, but I think prepping for case interviews is going to help you so, so much. Um, Behavioral interviews, prepping definitely helps, but I think you kind of reach a point where you've done everything you can do. Case interviews, there are so many practice case interviews out there that you could do them on and on and on. I think there's like always room for improvement with case interviews. We're definitely, it's a little bit unnatural to some people. It's something that you might not really see in any other part of your life or in school. Um, but at the end of the day, I want you to just remember that they're trying to test how you think and how you can communicate your thinking. So here are 6 steps to structure your case answer. So, one is clarify the problem. Make sure that you understand the objective. The worst thing is if you go through a whole case interview and you're trying to solve the wrong problem. So, ask questions in that first step. They're going to present you the question, and then you're going to take a minute and you're going to ask any questions that you're confused about. You want to make sure that you totally understand the problem so that your solution is going to be as helpful as possible. Second, you're going to identify key issues, and then you're going to develop a framework. And then you're going to prioritize what you actually want to analyze first, and you're going to make a plan. Then you'll actually analyze the data and interpret it. In this step, there'll be a lot of calculations. And then finally, you'll summarize and recommend your solution. And in this step is really when you're going to pull everything together and propose your solution for the problem. So going back, as you can see, step 5 is analyze the data. When you're doing this, so case interviews can look a lot of different ways. The data might be verbally given to you. They might give you stats about like their revenue or their profit. They might give you a chart that you have to analyze. They might give you different graphs or just like different reports and things like that. But here's some tips and tricks to go about analyzing that data. Um, First rule I have is don't just compute numbers. So a lot of times you'll have a piece of paper and you'll be doing mental math and kind of walking your interviewer along the mental math that you're doing. Never just like say a number, always explain what that number means. It's kind of going back to like, I don't even know what grade math when you would get points off for not putting the units on there. Make sure that you're always explaining what that number is, whether it's people or money or whatever it is. Just always state what you're doing. Also, don't go completely silent and just start doing math on your paper. Explain to your interviewer what you're doing. This is one of the downsides or benefits, I'm not really sure, of doing it online, but they can't see your paper that you're working on. So you have to walk them through, be like, okay, so now I'm going to take the 20% profit margin and multiply it by this number. Like walk them through every single step that you're doing so they can understand what you're doing. Um, the second tip is a little bit more so for in-person interviews, but try to be really organized, so that the interviewer can follow, and don't write messy calculations that are hard to read. Again, if it's over Zoom, they're not going to actually physically be able to see your paper, but still trying to keep things organized so that if they ask follow-up questions, you can easily report back to them. Um, this kind of goes back to the first thing I was saying, but don't present numbers without explaining what they mean. This is more so when you're getting, like when you're doing equations and getting answers. Interpret those results as you go and try to tie them back to the problem. So as I said, like if you were doing like the 20% profit margin by like the 2025 profit, um, and then explain what that number is at the end. So it's like now I have this number which represents what. Don't again like try to always just like explain what those numbers are meaning as you go along. A lot of times also the interviewer will correct you if you're wrong. They'll be like, "Oh wait, can you think about what that number is?" Or like, you want to double check your math on that one?" Um, with that, don't blindly accept data without questioning it. Make sure that you're checking any assumption you're using. So sometimes you'll have to make assumptions about a population, about a market size, or things like that. Make sure you kind of like ask permission from your interviewer on these things. So be like, I'm going to assume that there are 3 million people living in this city. Is that okay with you? And they'll be like, yep, that's perfect. Keep going. Um, and you can also kind of do that along the way as you're getting your answers. Be like, does this sound right to you? Sometimes they'll be like, oh, you have to keep going. I'm not sure yet because they don't have all those numbers on their side. You might be taking a different approach. Um, the math is going to get a little bit complicated, so use estimates or round numbers when appropriate. Again, kind of ask your interviewer that permission when doing this. Be like, oh, I'm going around 103 to 100. Is that okay with you for simplicity? And most times they'll say yes. And then step six, this is kind of a similar advice to what I had in the behavioral interview, but to make sure to end with that final step of really connecting everything back. So connect your results to your recommendation. At the end, you're going to present that final recommendation or solution, and make sure that you're using some of the evidence you just worked on, in order to really make that recommendation as powerful as possible. Okay. Now, you guys, if you haven't started case prepping or that has is case casing is something that you're unfamiliar with, these are really good resources to one, gain exposure, but also have live practice and really just like get to know casing. One rule I interviewed for McKinsey and Bain along my interviewing path. I didn't end up getting offers at either of them. But someone told me that for those interviews, you should aim for like 40 hours of prep, which kind of sounds crazy. But when you start going through the case prep process, you're going to see that a lot of these hours are kind of just spent on learning what a case interview really looks like, and what you should be prepared to do walking into them. One really helpful tool that's on here was Victor Chang on YouTube. He basically walks through live cases either with a person, and you can just listen along to these. This is how I started doing my case prep. You can just listen along to these videos, even if you're like at the gym or whatever you may be while you're making dinner or whatever it may be. You can be playing these videos and just listening to them, to hear what a live case interview sounds like as you keep practicing. Something I would do is like pause the video and do the work myself and then compare it to what the answer was. Some other helpful tools are management on here it says consultant. I think it's consultant. This is a super helpful tool. This has a lot of like live practice and different like drills on their website. Management Consultant is actually having an event at USC, I want to say next week. So be sure to check that out if any of you are interested in that. Let me know, but I think it should be posted on Handshake. But I can also try to get the link to that if anybody's interested. This is a super awesome resource for practice and getting practice cases. Case Coach is another awesome online resource that I would really recommend. And the final one that I use and I would recommend using is firm specific resources. I think all of the big three and some of the big four have practice cases or mock cases on their websites. So if you just look those up, like McKinsey Case Prep, they have a couple example cases with or without example answers, or you can find videos of people online doing the answers. I want to say Deloitte has a really good online one where you can kind of tap through it and reveal the answers as you go. But these are just really awesome resources. Again, one to gain exposure, but then also do some live practice once you kind of have a better understanding of what a case really looks like. So, similar to the behavior interviews, here's how to actually practice case interviews. You want to structure, analyze, practice, and refine. So, for structure, memorize your approach. So, going into it, they're going to present you the problem. You're going to ask them questions. I'm actually going to go back to my slide to make sure. So, you're going to clarify the problem. You're going to identify the key issues. Be like, okay, with this company, I see that they are having problems with blank, blank, blank. We're going to look into this. You're going to develop your framework. You're going to prioritize, you're going to analyze, and you're going to summarize. Um, and then practice. One thing you can do a lot of reps with if you don't want to go through full cases, is practicing structuring prompts. So just going through a little, you can look up like practice cases or doing like YouTube videos or whatever, and you can stop and not like end up going through the whole case. But just practicing structuring the prompts, whether, um, yeah, and and then like you can just practice that, look at how you did, and then move on. I think this is a really important first step, and you can't really get past the rest of the case interview unless you know how to structure the prompt at the beginning. One tip for this is to learn core frameworks. There's a bunch of different ones out there. When I was doing case prep, I had a Google Doc with a bunch of different frameworks on it. There's like profitability frameworks, market entry, and pricing, or and there's so many more. You don't have to memorize all of the ones out there. Just kind of have an understanding of the different frameworks, so that you can choose one when you're going to solve these problems. Then we can move into step two. For the analyzing step, you're really going to want to practice mental math. I know this sounds kind of silly. I don't know what all of your guys' majors are, but mental math is something you maybe haven't used in a while, and you might forget how hard some of it is. Like, even just carrying over zeros when you're doing this math can get very confusing. And it's okay to make math errors as you go along. I mean, that's definitely part of the criteria that the interviewer's looking at. But I think if you like make a couple of mistakes along the way, you're not going to get docked or anything like that. But yeah, doing mental math skills, those are on management consultant or case coach, but even just like practicing with on whatever sort of math website. Another good drill, if you don't want to do full cases, is market sizing drills. This is a super common one in cases. Deciding either like this comes up with a lot of different things, deciding how to price an item. Market sizing will be an important step for a lot. And then also practicing interpreting charts and different graphs clearly. Again, you can do this by looking up different cases or those interactive um, references I gave you. Third, like behavioral interviews, practice out loud. I think it's super important to do all of these little drills, but then also actually practice a full case out loud. I would recommend doing 5 to 8. I found it super helpful to do this with someone who's also recruiting for an interview that requires a case. And you guys can sit down and each do like 2 or 3 each, or even just do one each a couple times a week or something like that, or once a week. Time yourself so that you know. A lot of times case interviews will be 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes shorter than that, but just having a understanding of the time, so you're not super caught off guard when it's the real thing. Uh, Practice on giving structured recommendations, and remember, really tying back to the problem, and get feedback. So, like I said, it's really good to do this with a peer, and get feedback from them. I remember my roommate, who's the same major as me, same grade as me, we would do it together and we were able to give each other feedback because we could see things that we were doing wrong or things that we can improve on. But you can also get feedback from older people. You can reach out either to people you know who are older or to USC alum who might be willing to help you with this. Um, and then the final step is to refine, improve your synthesis. So a tip that's given in case interviews is to lead with your conclusion. Sometimes even at the beginning, you could be like, I noticed that the problem is this. I suspect that the solution will be this, but I want to dive into it by looking at X, Y, Z. Try to eliminate rambling. One thing that is really hard or might feel uncomfortable is allowing yourself to be silent during these interviews for periods of time and collect your thoughts. It's not weird to ask your interviewer if you can have a minute or two to think it out. This is totally normal, especially at the beginning when you're making your framework. You don't want to just present this and ramble on and on and on. You want to present this in a very structured way. So you want to say, I want to address problem X by, or problem A by looking at X, Y, Z. Furthermore, like component X has these factors, component Y has these factors, and component Z has these. You want to make everything as structured as possible. Even sometimes during case interviews, they'll ask me like, can you think of any other ideas? And you're gonna like jot give all the ones off your brain right away, and then they're gonna be like, can you think of anything else? And again, it's not weird if you were like, can you give me a minute to think? And then you can organize your thoughts. Another tip is to control your pacing and your tone. A big thing with case interviews is that you want to come off as confident in what you're saying. Again, there's not really a right or wrong answer, but you want to deliver what you're saying with confidence. Um, even if you don't think it might be the best answer, deliver it like you think it is, because that's what your interviewer wants to see. Okay, now I'm gonna do a brief pause here again. If anybody has any questions about case interviews specifically, but if not, I have a couple more tips going forward, just more generally about interviews. And then again, I'll open it up at the end for questions. But just wanted to take a pause here if anybody has any questions specifically about casing, because I know I just threw a bunch of information at you and want to let you digest it. And feel free, type your question in the chat, come off mute, introduce yourself. I'll give you guys like a minute or two to think on this.
Hi, Holly.
Hello.
Hi, I'm a junior. I'm studying business admin. I decided this semester consulting was for me. My question is to you, what case interview question was the hardest for you or most difficult for you to kind of get through?
Yeah, I think I only actually did, I want to say like two official, I guess I did two different companies and two rounds at one of the companies, case interviews, and one of the most difficult ones wasn't necessarily something I hadn't practiced before, but I remember I just got really caught up in the data and I was interpreting it wrong. A lot of times, like I said, the interviewer will kind of like interrupt you slash like correct you, or if you ask them like, "Hey, am I on the right track? Like, does this look right to you?" They'll kind of help you with that. But I kind of just like got caught up. I was interpreting the data a little bit wrong. I think I was looking at a chart wrong or something. So that kind of then just threw me off. But one piece of advice I would say is like, don't worry if you like interpret a graph wrong or if you get like a math error along your way. Just kind of keep going. Your interviewer will interject and kind of correct you and put you back on path. And try to just like speak with as much confidence as possible going forward. So I would say that that was probably my most difficult one just because I did get so thrown off in the middle of it. But looking back on it, I wish that I kind of just like let that go. It was like a little minor mistake and I probably could have gone on with more confidence. But yeah, I would say that that was probably my most difficult one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, if nobody has any other questions at this time, I'm going to keep going with some final tips about interviews in general. So, as I mentioned, I think when I was explaining the behavioral interviewer, a big part of interviews, both in behavioral and case, is going to be asking your interviewers questions. Overall tip I have here is to research your interviewer and your company. I used to think it was super weird, or that my interviewer was going to think it was weird to look them up before on LinkedIn. I thought they were going to think that I was like a stalker or something. So I kind of was like hesitant to do this, but I've learned during recruiting that this is actually super normal and it makes you come in much more prepared. So if you do know your interviewers beforehand, which isn't always the case, but if you do know them, look them up on LinkedIn, look at their background. They'll obviously introduce themselves in the interview. But just going into it, knowing who you're talking to, what their experience is like, and you can also craft a question a little bit more specifically to them. With that, also research the company you're interviewing for. I think if an interviewer gets on an interview and they ask you a question like, "Oh, why do you want to work here?" and you really don't have an answer, obviously they're not going to choose you. So just do a little bit of research, find something that aligns with you. Explain why you think you'd be a good fit there, things like that. But now I'm gonna break it down into different sections. So first, you can ask questions about roles and responsibilities. So, a basic question would be like, what does a typical day look like for someone in this role? That'll just give you a little bit more insight into what you would actually be doing there. Um, I always like to say that an interview is both ways. As much as they're interviewing you, you also should try to be interviewing the company to see if they're a good match for you and if it's somewhere you want to work. So asking questions to learn a little bit of more, learn a little bit more about what you would actually be doing can be super helpful for you. Another question, another range of questions is asking about the team and the culture. Again, you really want to know what the culture of the company is before you go and work there. One question that somebody actually told me during my recruiting experience that I kind of borrowed from them and then used on my interviewing journey was this following question. On the days you wanted to quit, why didn't you? I think this question really gives a real answer. A lot of times people will ask, what's your favorite part about working here? But I think this is a little bit more gritty. They're going to explain maybe what they don't like about their job, which also is good to hear. And then they're going to explain what they love about it and what's keeping them there, which is normally a pretty powerful answer. Another sector that you can ask about is the company and the impact that they're making at the company and the impact that the company's making in the market. So you could ask a question like, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the company right now? This is where researching the company might come into hand. You could be like, oh, I saw an article that this company just bought a share of this, or like this company is implementing this technology. Like, how do you think that's going to affect it, or something like that. Um, Finally, I think, yeah, this is kind of what I just mentioned on, but trying to come up with thoughtful questions. So like I read about this project. How did that team approach that challenge? Um, Trying to highlight something that the interviewer said to show that you're listening to them. You'd say like, oh, you mentioned that you go, like you now are going into office 3 days a week. Like, can you elaborate on how that shapes day-to-day work or something like that? And then again, you want to learn about the company you're going to work at. So asking questions like what differentiates this company from others in the industry? One tip overall I have about questions is do have these prepared beforehand. Obviously, you can ask questions as they come up, as you think of them throughout the interview, but it is helpful to have a couple jotted down or just at least thought of beforehand so that when they ask you, oh, do you have any questions? You're not just left there staring blank at them. I think it is helpful to have a couple prepared beforehand or just some go-to ones. Like whenever I didn't have a specific question, I would ask on the days you wanted to quit, why didn't you? That was one of my favorite go-tos. Um, okay, I think this is my, yeah, okay, this actually, okay, I have a couple more slides and then I'll open it up for questions. So I want to say, all of you, first of all, are very accomplished just being a USC student. And to go into these interviews with confidence, confidence is key for this. Speak with confidence, highlight who you are, highlight all of your accomplishments because I know you guys are all accomplished students. But here's three key checks to ensure that confidence. Know your frameworks, know your examples you're going to use for the behavioral interviews. Know that you've practiced cases inside out. Speak logically, speak steadily, and speak with purpose. Like I said, don't go rambling on and on and on. Take time to pause and speak clearly and really deliver what you want to say. And then finally, maintain good posture, eye contact, and composure. Um, as I kind of just explained, composure is something hard, sometimes that's hard to maintain if you get thrown off track or if they ask you a hard question that you maybe didn't answer perfectly, or maybe it's a story you've never told in an interview before and you feel really caught off guard. Just move on. The rest of the interview is there for you. Really try to stay composed. I know it's nerve-wracking, but I hope that all these tips will help you be a little bit more calm during it. But yeah, confidence is key. Basically, you guys got this. With more practice, you'll feel more comfortable doing it. Confidence is only going to build by doing reps of practice, by doing these interviews live. You'll get better with it with time, I swear. And you'll get more comfortable going into it, I promise. And then I want to give some after the interview tips. A lot of times people think that once you finish an interview, you're done and that's it. But I think there is a lot of important steps that happen after an interview that really could make a difference. First, I think send a thoughtful thank you note. One tip I have here is to highlight something that you and the interviewer talked about, whether this might be a commonality you guys highlighted and came across with each other, whether, this is something one of the projects you talked about, and the interviewer asked you a follow-up question on just something highlighting your specific conversation so that they remember who you are. Unfortunately, interviewers a lot of times are interviewing a lot of people, maybe even like 100 people throughout the whole cycle. So you really want to find a way to stand out and make sure that they're remembering you. So setting a thoughtful thank you, thanking them for their time, and just really choosing at least one thing specific to your conversation. Secondly, after an interview, reflect on your performance. I actually meant to say this before, but during case interviews, another question I think asked in every single case interview that I did was how can I improve? A lot of times with case interviews, they will give you feedback after it, but sometimes they send this feedback in an email, or sometimes you never really like see the rubric that they're using. But I would always just be like, I know there's always room for improvement in any type of an interview, but especially in a case interview. Could you tell me anything that you think I should continue improving on as I like continue my internship or like continue my job search or continue casing or whatever I said? I think taking this step to really reflect on how you did is really when you're going to grow. Like I said, with practice, you'll get more comfortable in it. But really just reflecting on how you did, even if it went really bad, think about like, okay, why did it go bad? Like, why did I let that throw me so much? How can I do better next time? Is really, really helpful. Third, follow up strategically. I kind of touched on this with the follow up email. Four, update your interview tracker. If anyone's interested in this, I can show you an example of what my interview tracker looked like. But just making sure that you're keeping track of these interviews somewhere, so that you know who to follow up with. Just keeping track of all that stuff is definitely important because it can get a little bit overwhelming. I specifically use like an Excel spreadsheet, but I know different things work for different people. And then five, keep momentum after an interview. Don't just, I mean, literally right after the interview, kind of like let it go. Go do whatever you want to do. Let pressure's off. You did it. Congrats. But keep the momentum going. The following week or the following days. Keep pushing. Keep applying to other things. Send those emails. And don't, I guess, just don't stop after the interview. It's obviously congrats to you for getting through that stage. But just keep pushing. Keep going through. And yeah, but that's all I have for you guys today. I put my info back up here. I have my email on here if any of you want to reach out and ask me any more specific questions, or if you want to connect one-on-one, I'm happy to do that. I also put my upcoming coffee chats on here, which looks similar to this, but basically I like put up this blank slide, and it's just more of a open conversation. These are like group coffee chats. So those will be coming up March 23rd and April 13th if you guys have any interest in joining those. But yeah, we have about 10 minutes left. I'm gonna leave the rest of the time for questions. Um, you guys can type them in the chat, or like Sabrina, you guys can come off mute. I appreciate any participation. Okay, I have one question in the chat. She asked if I had the chance to do the interview with McKinsey and Bain again, what things would I do differently to increase your chances? I think that's a really good question. I think even though I did practice a lot, I would probably practice more out loud. I did like a bunch of written cases. So I would go through these cases. Like I said, I would do like watch a YouTube video and pause it and do my answer and then compare it. But I wish that I did more cases out loud because I found that sometimes the structure of how I was talking wasn't always delivered as much as perfectly as I wanted it to be. Another tip that like this is gonna be different for everybody, but that I specifically got, which was advice that I gave to you guys, was to slow down. Um, I again, I kind of felt really awkward when I would be like, "Oh, can I have a minute to think?" And like I would think it had been like 2 minutes, but it had only been like 30 seconds. So that's also important why to time yourself during your practice ones, but just allowing yourself time to think. They're throwing complex problems at you. So even if they ask you any question that they ask you throughout the case interview, it's normal to ask for time or even just take a brief 20-second pause and structure your thoughts. I think at any point in the interview when you can deliver as much structure as possible, that's when you're going to be the most successful. Sorry, I kind of gave a rambling answer there, but I guess to narrow it down to three things, I would say practice more live cases with timing. Second, I would take time to pause. And third, I would structure my answers whenever possible. Okay, I have another question in the chat. Okay, yeah. So my coffee chat's coming up. Yeah, that is something you would sign up for. They'll be posted the same way that this event was posted on Handshake. Um, so you guys can find them in the same place there. I think they're called like Industry Insider Coffee Chat, and mine's Analytical and STEM. So that's what that will look like. But yeah, you can sign up for if you have trouble finding it, feel free to email me and I can share that link to you. But it will look very similar to this, but basically I don't have a presentation at the beginning and then it's just left open for questions at the end. Um, okay, and then Alyssa asked for my interviewer tracker. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for 1 second so I can pull that up. Um, Another helpful resource I want to give you guys is any past presentation I did will be posted on the Industry Insider website through the Career Center. So you guys can look there. I actually did a whole presentation about just navigating the internship search, which is kind of like this is when I presented my internship tracker, but kind of a more previous step to the actual interview prep if that's something that you're interested in learning a little bit more about. But this is actually a mock of like, this isn't the actual one I did. I created this just kind of as a mock for my presentation of my internship tracker, but this is just how it works for me. I'm someone who likes Excel spreadsheets. I know everybody's not like that. You might like it like in a pretty Canva or something like that, but this is just kind of what works for me. So find what works for you. But just organizing all of these different applications and interviews into one spot, it's going to get really overwhelming if you try to just keep this all in your head. So as you can see on the top here, like my internship tracker, I would break down the company, the role, the location, where I found this, when did I apply, what's my status? Because sometimes literally at a certain point you might be applying to so many companies that you literally can't remember, like, oh, wait, did I apply to that company? And then it's hard to go find your login to see what you had to log in on Workday or whatever it was. Then keeping track of your interviews, keeping track of the deadlines if you haven't applied yet, like on, well, I guess these dates are all in the past now, but say like there were deadlines coming up, like some are due at the end of April and you want to prioritize those. That's a really nice way to organize it when you're looking for different internships. And then any notes, like if you talk to someone there, or like this one said, like auto rejection, Deloitte needed case prep, or whatever it may be. But just finding some sort of way to organize your thoughts, that'll be way too much to keep organized in your head, or at least it was for me. So I think just coming up with some sort of source that works for you to keep this stuff organized.
Hi, I had a question. It's not about consulting, but something your institute you're in. Can I ask it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm a freshman studying ISE.
Oh, nice.
Uh,
Yeah, I'm an ISC major.
okay, I just want to know how did you get into IISE?
Yeah, you can actually just join. I can send you like if you're interested, I can send you like their newsletter, but they have meetings, I want to say like once a month. I'm less involved now that I'm a senior. But they have meetings like once a month and then they'll have like different events here and there. Like Sometimes different companies will come and talk. And then you pay like a small fee. I think it's like $5 or $10 for the year of the semester, to be like a national member, and then you get access to all these different events. Or I think you can pay like per event, but it's pretty easy. And it's definitely a really awesome way to connect with some of the older peers and also the peers in your grade. But I can um, send you, let me actually see who sent, I can find out who sends those emails if that's something of interest to you.
I do get their emails. I didn't know they have like meetings every month. I look into that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. But like I said, feel free to email me or connect with me on LinkedIn with any follow-up questions. I'm happy to do one-on-ones or come to my future coffee chats. But I really appreciate you all joining today. I hope that you at least learned one thing and can take something away from this. But I just want to reiterate, you guys are definitely on the right track. Even just coming to this is a really great first step. You guys got this, and I wish the best for all of you, and I hope to be in touch in the future. But thank you so much for coming and have a good rest of your night.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.